First, and you can hear these in arguments if you pay attention. Hopefully the arguments die down as time goes on, but the change in counterinsurgency didn't matter. Either Iraq or U.S. forces had already adapted to the environment or security was already improving. Well, no, the U.S. forces had not adapted to the environment entirely. Some of them had, but it wasn't uniform across the force. Not until the publication of this counterinsurgency doctrine in December 2006. And as far as things being stable before the surge, here's the beginning of the surge right here. And if that's stable, then I'll buy that stock. So things had not stabilized before the surge. These are security incidents, anything that blows up, basically. Myth number 2, it was the awakening that really solved the issue in Iraq. It wasn't the surge. Here's Sheikh Sadr, Abu Risha al-Rishawi. He's the brave sheikh who first rose up against al-Qaeda, later killed by al-Qaeda in a roadside bomb attack. And General Petraeus meeting him. This is week 1 of General Petraeus' command tenure. And again, General Petraeus and Multinational Force Iraq gave a huge boost to the awakening, which again would have been a local event otherwise. Myth number 3, all we did was put them on the payroll. I think I've already talked about that. Here's some Sons of Iraq. We put them under our chain of command, so they had to wear a uniform, because the Geneva Conventions say that armed combatants have to wear a uniform. Their uniform were road guard vests. But they did great work in controlling their communities. At their peak, around 103,000. At 16 million a month, that's cheap at 5 times the price, 10 times the price. This is a really inexpensive way to win a war. Myth number 4, the surge was not a strategic shift. It was just tactics. It was just a tactical adaptation on the ground. Jean Gentil is the person who says this. No, it was not. It was a holistic strategy. This is what General Petraeus called the Anaconda Plan, after the Civil War Anaconda Plan that squeezed the Confederacy. I'm not going to go into each piece of this, but just suffice it to say this is a holistic plan where you figure out what al-Qaeda needs and then what you need to do to counter those needs. And we did every one of those things. Also, the strategic plan was to take what was a virulent insurgency in the near term, start local efforts to build from the bottom up counterinsurgency, and then knit those together in the intermediate term, and in the very long term, you get to reconciliation in Iraq, but that is the very long term. So there was design to it. All we did was try to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. Well, the period of the surge was the period of greatest military deaths for the United States and the Iraqis in the war. So there was a lot of fighting that took place. This was not just hearts and minds. Myth number 6, sectarian cleansing had already stabilized Baghdad before the surge started. Well, this is a map of ethno-sectarian violence in Baghdad. Here's the beginning of the surge. That looks like a lot of explosions. If ethno-sectarian violence had already separated the populations, you would have this. But instead, we had that after the end of the surge in the summer of 2008. Myth number 7, it was the ceasefire of the Jaish al-Mahdi that really created the improvement. Well, there's Muqtada al-Sadr. I already talked about that. He wouldn't have done it had the surge not already had some impact on security in Baghdad and Iraq. Myth number 8, General George Casey's strategy of accelerating transition to Iraqi security forces would have worked. We just didn't give it enough time. I'm not going to read these. You can glance over them. But his own staff, and he signed these documents, admitted that his strategy was failing. And it's only in retrospect do people say, oh, it was succeeding, or it could have succeeded. Patently false. We are failing to achieve objectives. Again, his own campaign progress review. The real reason for the improvement in security was the improvement of special operations forces. We just killed and captured our way to victory. Bob Woodward in The War Within. This is his take. And that's patently false as well. It's the synergy of conventional forces, Iraqi forces, working with the Special Operations Forces that had such an impact. And then finally, all we did was create a decent interval for the orderly withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq. Now, that may be the way it worked out, but that was not the intent. This is the intent. And I was in on all these National Security Council meetings when President Bush said, this needs to be like South Korea. U.S. forces there for the long term. We're now going on 60 years in South Korea. South Korea didn't look like South Korea in the first few decades after the Korean War. It's only in the last 2 decades that it's become a vibrant democracy and economy. That was Bush's vision for Iraq. Unfortunately, we have a different vision for Iraq. And when President Obama, I won't get into this, but when President Obama withdrew troops in 2011, we withdrew the glue that was holding the place together, and you could see it now begin to spiral downhill. All right, there I am in my glory days, watching General Petraeus' back. Any